Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second edition of the Future of the Great Lakes Dialogue Series, jointly convened by CityAge and the Binational Council of the Great Lakes Region, the CGLR, through its Great Lakes Economic Forum and sponsored by Black and Veatch and White and Case. I am Naomi Parnas, CityAge's MC and the co-founder of KPW Communications. I am so pleased to be here with you today. I know we have people who are joining us from all over, so welcome. We're so glad that you're here. Attendees from across the continent are here with us today, and we look forward to diving into the conversations as to what's next for the future of North America's infrastructure, with a special focus on how we can invest in water systems that are resilient, affordable, and sustainable. Before we get started, a few quick notes about the comment section. When you comment in the chat section, make sure to direct your comments to all panelists and attendees. This way everyone can engage and we can all read your comments. The default setting right now directs messages just to panelists, so you're going to want to change that so everyone can see what you have to say. For specific questions, please use the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen to ask questions of our speakers and panelists. Make sure to add them throughout the program so they can not get lost in the chat. We want to make this event as interactive as possible. If everyone can take a moment, tell us your name and where you're zooming from. Now we're going to kick things off with our first poll question. The first question is, how would you rate North America's investment in its water system? The question there, poor, average, good, or excellent? So let us know. Okay, while the results come in, let's get the program going. I'm now going to introduce our first speaker. To kick off this important discussion, let's welcome Mark Fisher, President and CEO Council of the Great Lakes Region. Mark, we're eager to hear your opening comments.
Naomi, thank you for that kind introduction. It's great to see you. Thank you for emceeing what will be another fantastic discussion. And I want to thank everyone else for joining today's discussion, which is being convened by CityAge and the Council of the Great Lakes Region, as Naomi said, as part of our Future of the Great Lakes webinar series in our Great Lakes Economic Forum. Water, as we all know, sustains life. It sustains our livelihoods and our economy. In the Great Lakes region, which I'm focused on, which spans 8 states from New York to Minnesota, and the Canadian provinces of Ontario and Quebec, we're fortunate to have a lot of water. It's constantly flowing through our lakes and our rivers and our groundwater aquifers. In fact, the 5 Great Lakes hold 84% of North America's surface fresh water, making them the largest freshwater system in the world. However, we forget that only 1% of the waters of the Great Lakes are renewed on an annual basis by precipitation, runoff, and groundwater. So while water seems abundant in this region, it is ultimately a finite, precious natural resource. And as we all know, it's under constant pressure from increased urbanization as well as industrial and agricultural uses. And in this regard, there are plenty of water infrastructure issues in the Great Lakes region that we need to pay attention to if we are to sustain and protect this vital resource for generations to come, whether it's drinking water and wastewater systems, sewer separation and flood control, water use and conservation. The list of water infrastructure issues is growing. And it's growing at a time where we know that public pressure for basic and improved water services are happening at a time of increased public debt, which will certainly challenge us to be able to invest in the infrastructure that we need for the future. It will also encourage us to consider alternative approaches to procurement and financing. We're certainly seeing some positive progress finally on infrastructure in the United States through the infrastructure bill. We're seeing massive investments in Canada through Infrastructure Canada in water infrastructure. There's just so much we need to talk to and think about, as we build infrastructure and right-size infrastructure for the future competitiveness and sustainability of the Great Lakes region. And again, making sure we can protect this vital resource for future generations. The Council of the Great Lakes region certainly wants to encourage this dialogue, but we also need to bring people together from industry, government, academia, the nonprofit sector to think about the priorities and the projects that ultimately will achieve a sustainable future in the Great Lakes region. So I encourage everybody after today's webinar to visit our website, councilofthegreatlakesregion.org, learn more about us, and help us shape a dialogue around water and infrastructure going forward. Thank you again for joining us. Let's get started. Back to you, Naomi.
Thank you so much, Mark. starting our cameras here and putting ourselves on mute. We're all over the place here trying to do this, but I want to thank you very much for that. I want to get to the results from our first poll question. We can put those results up on the screen. 46% saying poor. So there you go. Only 1% saying excellent. Our next poll question: what do you think is the most pressing problem facing our water systems today? Extreme weather events like floods, contaminant levels, lack of affordability, leakage, or lost water? We'll give you those results after. Our next speaker is well known for her expertise in the treatment and reuse of water and wastewater resources, and a champion for water's true value and its impact on sustainable communities. Please welcome Cindy Lage, the president of Black & Beach's water business. Hi, Cindy.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to share a few thoughts with you about the future of our water infrastructure as the lead-in to a more in-depth conversations exploring how many water utilities are delivering innovative solutions to the challenges they face. It's this blend of innovation, collaboration, and leadership that will guide us to the future and continue to emphasize the value of water to our communities and to the world. So I thought I'd start out our conversation today by giving some context to the challenges we face related to water infrastructure. The World Economic Forum publishes a global risk report, which is generated from input from political, business, and science leaders from around the globe. And in 2020, in their report, the 15th edition, for the first time, the top 3 risks, both in impact and likelihood, are environmental. And they're related to 1, a lack of action related to addressing climate changes, 2, extreme weather, droughts and floods, and 3, the biodiversity loss. All of these relate to water. Also, since 2012, water crisis is consistently in the top 5 risks, especially related to impact. So when we look at the focus to increase the sustainability of our global community, the Sustainable Development Goals provide a framework which highlights the integral role that water plays. It is front and center with SDG number 6, clean water and sanitation for all. The 6 sub-goals of SDG 6 are the core functions that we in the water utility space provide for our communities and our society. It's also important to note, though, that there is no SDG that is impacted by water. SDG number 3, which is good health and well-being. We can look at number 11, sustainable cities and communities. Climate action number 13, life below water 14, life on land 15, are all strongly related to water. And if you look at the remaining 11 SDGs, the impact of water is seen either directly or indirectly. So taking the conversation a bit deeper, the challenges our water utilities face are complex, and rising to these challenges will be the hallmark of successful water utilities. So starting at the top, aging infrastructure continues to plague utilities. The balancing act is a challenge. We seek to be good stewards of financial resources and continue to sweat the assets for more life, yet equipment and facility limitations drive a need for investment to ensure reliable performance and the ability to operate under the shocks and stresses of climate change. And funding continues to be top of mind for all utilities. In many locations, we experience the dichotomy of increasing population in combination with conservation. As a result, we have increased needs or reduced revenue. And that's before we even talk about the affordability issues. The water sector has 2 quality-driven imperatives: protect human health and protect the environment. With increasing regulatory requirements and zero tolerance for failure, predictability every day is paramount to serve our communities. And we treat this water and we're very proud of what we produce, and then we lose it. In the US, 6 billion gallons. For context, that's 12,000 Olympic pools of water is lost every day. And that in itself is a challenge. But then when you equate that to the financials and the funding challenge we have, we just gave up an annual revenue of 8.8 billion. We have to address this. And then we further complicate the investment needs with we don't have adequate workforce to operate and maintain our infrastructure. Thus, we need to drive innovation and codify systems to capture the knowledge of retiring operators. With automation, we also see the need for a different workforce. We may need fewer workforce, but we need higher skills. And then in 20 and 21, COVID just amplified the challenges. but it heightened the awareness of just how critical water infrastructure is to our communities. So the need for the water sector infrastructure to manage and adapt to the challenges of today and tomorrow is clear. As a result, we must develop a forward-looking roadmap focused on mitigating the impacts of climate change, population growth, and economic and societal movements. We must envision a future that builds on today and addresses the changing climatic conditions that we live in. We must start the resiliency journey of our water infrastructure by recognizing the factors that have hindered advancement so that we can address them, as well as separate our decisions from that historical thinking. Factors like political will, affordability, water equity, risk tolerance, and the commitments for long-term investment. Those have often interrupted our progress. And without addressing and overcoming these factors, the resilience required will not be accomplished. Our future requires an enhanced or different approach from the past. We can no longer look inwardly and evolve or change the landscape around water management. The future requires us to think holistically, beyond our own boundaries, and understand the big picture. What gives us the best value to go beyond removal to recovery and holistic management? What are the opportunities? It requires us to be collaborative and integrate the thoughts and ideas across the community. What is the best ecosystem to innovate and bring new ideas to market faster? We cannot have a myopic view. We need to break down our silos and seek to accelerate new ideas and their delivery. And it requires us to think transformationally. Like being collaborative and breaking down silos for the acceleration of new ideas, we need to challenge conventional paradigms of not doing enough to just get by. We need to do more. The civil infrastructure of our communities is an outcome of past practices. These practices are being tested frequently under today's realities, which include climate extremes as a major factor, and they fail at an increasing rate. Infrastructure problems are often approached through siloed solutions to address a singular service. We look at water supply, we look at pollution control, we look at stormwater diversion. While appropriate for the time, the changes in external and connected pressures require a new roadmap. We must envision a future that builds on today, yet provides a trajectory that is unlike our past. Our resilience is predicated on one water thinking. Now, in the most simplistic terms, one water is a holistic view of the drop without labeling different parts of it, judging its history, breaking it into fragments or silos such as drinking water, wastewater, stormwater, used water, impaired water, or all of the other descriptors that we come up with. One water values the entire drop, and it recognizes that all water is a part of a valuable resource that we must use in planning for the future. In 2017, the U.S. Water Alliance published a One Water Roadmap, which focused on several key tenets. So starting with a mindset that all water has value, from the water resources in our ecosystems to our drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater. A focus on achieving multiple benefits, meaning that our water-related investments should provide economic, environmental, and societal returns. Approaching decisions with a systems mindset that encompasses the full water cycle and larger infrastructure systems such as energy, transportation, telecommunications. Utilizing watershed scale thinking and action that respects and responds to the natural ecosystem, geology, and hydrology of an area. And finally, a premise of relying heavily on partnerships and inclusion, recognizing that the real progress will only be made when all stakeholders have a seat at the table. So the approach outlined six arenas for action to advance the One Water approach, as you see these here on the right. We have reliable and resilient water utilities, thriving cities, competitive business and industry, sustainable agricultural systems, social and economic inclusion, and healthy waterways. And while strategies were developed for each arena, they're all connected, which is what truly forms a One Water solution. When we take a holistic view in our water planning and integrate a systems thinking approach, we avoid unintended consequences and we maximize value. So what does that mean? It means using all water as part of our water supplies and breaking the link between water supply and climate and weather. It's driving water reuse and being more sustainable with our used water and stormwater, such that we create energy from waste, we protect aquatic environments, and we optimize green infrastructure. It's integrated planning in an overarching approach where providers consider all aspects of the water management cycle. Planning for resilience includes holistic, big picture thinking beyond our current boundaries. An implementation of actions specific to water systems rest on the water infrastructure pillars: drinking water, wastewater, water resources, waterways, urban and natural water systems. And it can take different forms for different communities. However, integration of specific actions with broader system-wide strategies and elements is what can make a whole system infrastructure more resilient compared to those that take disparate actions. It's the connection that matters. For example, integration of water and energy infrastructure vulnerabilities with forward-thinking approaches can create resources that can be reused, better used, saved to preserve depleting resources, or transition to more efficient resources. We can do so much more. Because water is the foundation of a community upon which other community pillars can be built. It drives economic value, but it is also priceless, as we have no alternative. It is our responsibility to be good stewards of how we manage every drop in our communities. Governments, communities, and water system providers must rethink how they plan, invest, and maintain water infrastructure. It is not just a matter of building more, but of building in more operational flexibility and resilience. It's about having a diverse array of assets with the flexibility to respond and recover from system shocks and stresses. It's about thinking strategically and the incorporation of asset management to resilience planning. It's thinking broadly about the impact of data analytics, smart water, and smart city programs. And it's about fiscal soundness. Water infrastructure isn't free or cheap, so creating financial resilience is critical to ensure that a community will have clean water and sanitation for all. When you have resilience, you have maintained and developed urban infrastructure. You have social equity and well-being. You have leadership and political support from the municipal government. You have a place where people want to live and work now and in the future. You have built a sustainable community. Without water, cities and communities cannot drive growth and economic development. They cannot be a sustainable community. Water supply and sanitation infrastructure makes it viable that you have a place where people want to live and work. Thinking holistically about water infrastructure creates the infrastructure hardening needed to address changing conditions. The benefits are plentiful, and they relate to people, profit, and planet. As you see this list here, all of that drives a thriving community to be able to make sure that we have those jobs and opportunities, that we have the quality of life with recreation, that we have healthy economy, that our ecology is great, that we have our food supplies and industry. All of that is critical to making sure that we have a sustainable future, and it takes a one water mindset. It all comes back to the message of challenging ourselves, not stopping at the traditional. Challenge the status quo and how we view water, food, energy, and the opportunity before us. Challenge the status quo and moving to sustainable resource management, a higher calling of wanting to do bigger, broader, and more sustainable things. Challenging the status quo to grow our technical competence and educate our enhanced water planning. Challenging the status quo for stakeholders to come together and innovate. Change doesn't happen in a vacuum. We need a holistic, collaborative approach to transform our thinking and drive change in the water sector. Water is the canary in the coal mine for climate change. I believe that the water utilities continue to rise to these challenges and seek to deliver sustainable and innovative approaches, which contributes to our communities, our economy, and to the health of the planet we all share. I'm looking forward to hearing even more examples of this innovation from the people on the panels today, as well as just the conversations in our industry, as I know that we will continue to see innovation and change in how we address our future to make it sustainable. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I know it was very interesting, and we're seeing from all the comments, we have people from all over the world, especially from North America, but I saw someone from Sri Lanka, so amazing. Hopefully we'll have an amazing discussion here today. So before we get to our next panel, here's the latest from the last poll. As you can see, 57% said, when we asked the question, what do you think is the most pressing problem? They said extreme weather. So very clear there what the answer was from everyone. And here's another poll question for you. As water systems go digital, what's the greatest cybersecurity risk? So stolen identity, theft of water, attack on, or ransomware. We'll have all of you answer that, and we will move on to our first panel. This is about partnerships to renew water infrastructure. We're going to review specific best practices on how to collaborate to renew water infrastructure. How do we make water systems more sustainable, deliverable, resilient, and affordable? Here are our experts. Nancy Quirk is the General Manager of the Green Bay Water Utility and has 34 years experience in the drinking water industry in Wisconsin. She is a registered professional civil engineer and has sat on a variety of advisory boards for water systems, both for the state of Wisconsin and the country. Elena Harkness is the Executive Director for Current, Chicago's Water Innovation Hub. She leads a team working to grow the blue economy, accelerate innovation, and solve pressing water challenges. Sean Agid is the Director of Partnerships and Financial Structuring for Corvius Infrastructure Solutions. He works collaboratively with the nation's most progressive municipal, military, and higher education leaders to create and implement innovative solutions. Our panel chair is Dolly Mirchandani, a partner of White and Case. She advises infrastructure and pension funds, sponsors and developers, commercial banks, institutional lenders, contractors, and government in the development, acquisition, divestiture, and financing of greenfield and brownfield energy and infrastructure assets. Please welcome our panel. I'll leave it to you, Dolly.
Thank you very much, Naomi, for that introduction and all the framing that has gone before this panel, because it's such a rich topic today. I'm going to caution everybody that in preparing for this panel, I think we've already conceded that we won't have enough time. So I'm going to charge right in, given that everyone's been introduced. And Sean, start with you. And the reason why is because we've talked a lot already, or heard a lot about innovation. And Corvius, who you're with, has had a lot of success across the country in developing innovative partnerships with government authorities. What I wanted to ask you about today, given that this is a Great Lakes focused discussion, can we start by looking at your partnership in Milwaukee? And what I'd love for you to talk about is, what do you think the key elements of your approach are, as discovered in as you've experienced in Milwaukee, but as you can see is being applicable for other places as well, that support a successful outcome for those partnerships?
Sure. Thank you, Dolly, and happy to be here. Thanks for having me. So yeah, I'll start with our partnership with Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewage District. We also have another expert on a later panel, Bree Plyer, with us today, who's on the district side, Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewage District, who can also expand on anything I say. But what's interesting and unique about our partnership with MMSD is essentially how it's structured. And generally speaking, our partnership is based on green infrastructure, and we call it a community-based partnership, not necessarily a public-private partnership, but it is the public sector working closely with the private sector. But what's unique about this program is, again, how it's contractually structured. So when you look at the nature of green infrastructure is highly fragmented, and it's geographically dispersed across several different municipalities. In this case, more than 20 different municipalities is MMSD's service area. So it includes the city of Milwaukee, but many adjacent neighborhoods and communities as well. So traditionally, looking at green infrastructure implementation, it's looked at one project at a time. And that's often leads to a very lengthy and expensive implementation process. So what we were able to do is structure an aggregated program that transfers the risk away from the public to the private sector by putting performance-based metrics in place. And some of those performance-based metrics that we have structured with MMSD is a fixed price per gallon. We have minimum local utilization requirements. We have private property requirements. We have certain locations where we have to build the actual infrastructure. But I think what's so unique about this program specifically is Corvius goes at risk and provides working capital to actually build the infrastructure. And by doing so, the district only pays Corvius once the infrastructure is in place and independently certified by a third party that it was built correctly. If there's any cost overruns, that means Corvius has to take on the risk. And again, by doing this, what I see is the only true way to truly mitigate the risk away from the public sector to the private sector, because doing this allows the municipality or the public sector to pay only after it's completed. So again, most partnerships or most infrastructure projects, the public sector is going to be paying throughout as a pay-as-you-go process, or they're going to be taking on financing themselves, and then they're going to have to be at risk for actually delivering on time or on budget. I think that's one of the key elements that's unique about this. And then quickly, I know we don't have a ton of time. The one other thing that's super important about this program is the community-based piece. All of these are called community-based partnerships. And the reason that the community is at the forefront of the title, community-based partnership, is because by design, we're not a vertically integrated company. What that means is we really want to build up the capacity in the local economy to actually perform the work. So we're working with small businesses, disadvantaged businesses, local businesses to provide not only the training and resources, but the actual bid opportunities to participate in the program. And what we've seen in more established partnerships, like the Clean Water Partnership, for example, is more than 81% of all money has gone to those partnerships. With MMSD, we're in our second year right now. The program's really ramping up. We're hopefully finishing our pilot by the end of next year, and we will have a much more established subcontractor capacity to continue for future phases. So I'll pause there and let other experts move on from here. Thank you.
Well, thanks for kicking us off, Sean. And I'd love to come back to you and talk to you about de-risking the operating period as well. You know, I think one of the issues that bedevils the water industry is deferred maintenance and the risk of ongoing performance, right? Not in addition to managing all this upfront cost overrun and related construction risks. So, I'll come back to you. Just hold that thought. I'm going to go to Nancy. Nancy, how about your insights? You've mentioned that you have implemented partnerships with the city of Green Bay. And what form have they taken? Maybe we'll start there. And then, as you're with the utility, I'd love to hear more about, what you think about the challenges that utilities are facing at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Dolly. And again, I'm also happy to be here. I just wanted to talk about, we don't have the public-private as much, but we definitely work with our Department of Public Works. They are the tax-based and we are the rate-based at the water utility. So we work with them on streets and storm sewer and sanitary sewer. We try to combine, we work together to look at what streets are the worst pavement, have the worst water main breaks, have the worst sewer inflow, and we try to prioritize those in a year to try to get as much as we can be replaced, because if we combine our efforts, it's going to be cheaper for us. We combine mobilization costs, we combine traffic control and erosion control, and it really helps keep our costs down. We can replace more infrastructure then. We've also done a master plan of where the priority of our pipes based on risk of failure and consequence of failure. And we've prioritized those and shared those with the Department of Public Works also. As far as the greatest risk to water utilities right now, I think, is the aging infrastructure. I mean, we still have over 200 main breaks a year on our 440 miles of distribution pipe. And they're all cast iron pipes, and we're in bad, very corrosive soils near the river, the Fox River. So with ours, we're trying very hard to replace as much infrastructure as we can and reduce those leaks. We pump water from Lake Michigan, which is about 26 miles from our city boundaries. And so we have to be mindful also that we're not, having lots of leaks, and that our pipes are secure and things too. So we started in 1886, so we have some pipes that are early 1900s that we still need to address. So I think that, and the contaminants. I mean, PFAS is huge in the state of Wisconsin, and I think around the country. And there's other things emerging that we need to be conscious of.
Yeah, a lot of inherited situation that we've got to tackle, and I'd like to come back to a couple of themes in a moment on that you've touched on, which is, can innovation help, with some of these problems that you have, right, whether technological or alternative approaches. But I'll come back to that. Elena, I want to get you in on the conversation here. It was music to my ears to hear Nancy talk about, the coordination and collaboration that's happening, and frankly, the information exchange, right? Even that, because I live in New York City, and my street gets ripped up, 8 times a month, really, for varying purposes, and it doesn't seem like anyone's talking to each other. So with your organization, you sit at the fulcrum between the private sector, utilities, and municipalities. And from what I understand, you do provide a vital part of the ecosystem in terms of, ensuring some of that right hand and left hand are communicating and optimizing collectively. I'd like to just understand, what strategies have you deployed with those constituencies to see how they can do, and what they need to do in an optimal way, optimizing the spend on a regional basis. And we'll talk, if we have time permitting, about the money coming from the infrastructure plan, et cetera. It's great that we have money. Then the next question is, what do we do with it, right? So if you could help us understand, what role you play and where you think the needs are for the right and left hand to talk to each other, that would be great.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for the framing, Dolly, and Sean and Nancy. It's great to be here with you and with everyone. It's a pleasure to be in this conversation about Great Lakes leadership and the infrastructure we need. So Current, as was mentioned, we're a nonprofit water innovation hub. So we really do sit at the intersection of multiple different sectors that all have a role in making sure we have resilient infrastructure and a robust economy on top of that. So I guess what I'd like to underscore here is the role that we play in the innovation ecosystem. I love that word, Dolly, and the fact that you teed it up that way. We are small, but the role that we play is really important because we're able to help to catalyze innovative projects and the kinds of coordinated planning and development that the utilities and our private sector partners have other sort of main things on their plate, right? All of our storm and wastewater utilities, you're going to hear from one of our major partners later, Commissioner Deborah Shore from the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District. They are mainly concerned with treating our storm and wastewater, making sure that it's not going into our waterways. I mean, that's the primary function that it should be. Our Department of Water Management, likewise, is focused on keeping our drinking water safe and secure. What Current is actually help look towards the future and think about what kinds of investments would we want to be making once we're able to think beyond, replacement, maintenance, getting to the place of thinking about forward-looking investments. And I'll give an example of how we're able to do that because of the sort of nonprofit position that we play and the structured partnerships we have with government, with university researchers, with other corporate partners, and very importantly, with community partners that are all kind of advocating for different facets of this. So we have just launched our project called H2 Now Chicago. It is real-time water quality monitoring for the Chicago River. Really exciting work. It's the first time that we've been able to get to real-time water quality monitoring in a major urban river in the US. And it's been a project that's many years in the making. The district already does water quality monitoring, but this public-facing effort, it required us to raise additional funds. It required us to raise and sort of muster additional partners and to work out what was a kind of high-risk technology installation, and definitely, a pilot, an innovative pilot. And over a period of several years, we've been able to roll that out in partnership with the public sector. We couldn't have done it without them. We wouldn't be here without them. But it's something that is really raising the awareness within the public about why our water quality matters, why these investments matter so much. And that's the public that's ultimately, making decisions to vote for rate increases to pay for them, or to support the kinds of infrastructure bills that are on the table right now. So we are playing a role in helping to communicate about those investments and to identify some of the innovative technologies that could become part of business as usual down the line. That's really important. Having that long-term ability to build those partnerships outside of government, the ability to raise and invest funding in those innovative projects to sort of de-risk them, and the ability to sort of be here for the long term with the community vision in mind. Those are some of the things that we've done and continue to do as a partner, an innovation partner to government.
Well, I think everyone needs an Elena. I think your phone is going to keep ringing, and I mean that quite seriously, because I think your point about the day job is a very real one. I mean, I've advised public authorities as well as private participants in the water space for a number of years now, and one thing that is always striking is the complexity, right, of some of these
Yes.
partnerships and the complexity of innovation. And anyone who wants to embark on that project, it's wonderful, but there is the day job. And you know, one
Absolutely.
has limited resources, and so having a partnership with your good self or similar, who can actually partner and support that kind of extracurricular activity that really needs to become part of the mainstream, is invaluable. I'm just going to invite our audience to start sending me questions. You've heard from all our panelists at this point. I have plenty of questions, but we have a lot of public participants in the audience today. You've all got issues and challenges which have motivated you to attend this conference today. And so if you've got questions, chime in, and I will try and pick them up as we go. All right, so with that, I'm going to take this back to all of you, actually, and you can choose who wants to go first. But I'd like to pick up on the points we were discussing about increased spending, and how increased spending, everyone thinks it's a good thing. I think we've just had an overwhelming consensus among everybody in this conference that nothing in this space is excellent from an investment perspective, and it's bare, there's bare participation at the good level. So more money is good, but what are we going to do with it? How do we spend it? And it's never enough, right? And so I'd like to maybe invite you. Who'd like to go first? Any volunteers? What's your wish list for optimized spend? And as you answer this, I would love to hear personally, how do we ensure that in spending this money, we don't just end up where we are today, right? Which to me is very much a burning question. Should we go back to Sean, given that you were first?
Sure.
All right, go on then.
Yeah, so I think when you look at a poll of hundreds or potentially thousands of different municipalities and utilities across the country, I think funding is always one of the biggest challenges associated with water infrastructure. So hopefully the infrastructure bill solves that challenge, right? Solves the funding challenge. But now there are other challenges associated with water infrastructure that we need to make sure are addressed to ensure that the funding is spent in the most efficient manner. And a lot of that is fragmentation. I mean, the nature of the water sector in the US is highly fragmented. I believe there's over 50,000 different water utilities in the US compared to just like 3,300 electric utilities. So that is going to be a difficult challenge. But I also think, the way you structure something can potentially accelerate or save money. And that's one of the things that, we always like to promote in our partnerships is aggregation, and having enough scale to create those economies of scale to actually drive down costs and reduce all of those frictional and transactional costs. So rather than doing one project at a time, you're putting a structure, a programmatic framework together, and you're doing it in a way where Dolly, to answer your question, how do we make sure we're not in the same place we are today? You do it in a way where you're transferring the risk away from the public sector, right? So you're really holding someone accountable to actually hit the goals and objectives of a utility or a municipality. Otherwise, they're not compensated or they get some kind of penalty. I think those are going to be some key points that we need to consider going forward.
That's a really good point. And I think in a way, when people talk about partnerships with the private sector, what gets lost a little bit, and I'm a lawyer, right? So I think probably more in terms of the rules that are governing the relationship. But it is actually an opportunity for public sector participants to regulate their system through contract. Because by coming up with performance standards and metrics and penalties and everything else, and making it enforceable, your counterparty is highly accountable for the outcome and highly motivated and incentivized to perform. And people think about cost, and but you will, again, which is obviously important, and you can compete on cost and ensure that you're getting a good price. But you also want performance. And with the lack of accountability at times, you don't see that, or just incentives, right? Are there incentives to spend on maintenance rather than building, right? For example. Nancy, how do you see the send, and where do you think the money should go, and how?
I also have been, I know I was just on a meeting with our mayor earlier this week about the ARPA funds and what can they be used for in the community. And they really want to put most of that money into economic development, and they have no plans to help water infrastructure at all in that first funding. The infrastructure bill, from what I've heard, I'm also a member of the Regulatory Committee for American Metropolitan Water Agencies, AMWA, and they gave us an outline of what that is going to do. And a lot of that money is going for lead service replacements. And I just wanted to address that a little bit, because when you talk about innovation and thinking outside the box, I think that we all have to do that when, as managers of water utilities, that we have to look like, how can you get this done? When we started our program in 2016, I didn't know where all the money was going to come from for private lead service replacements. The state stepped up with the safe drinking water loans and said, hey, you can use this for principal forgiveness for your property owners. And in the meantime, the state legislature was starting to pass some Leading with Lead Act that would allow water utilities to help contribute to property owners to get their lead service replaced, so that we could get the lead out of it. And then we also had the Green Bay Packers helping by a tax refund that gave to the city for, and we were able to get some of that money to help replace lead services. So I think just thinking outside the box, where can you go to get help? Just doing everything you can to replace as much infrastructure and get rid of those lead services too, as you can. And I think that in the state of Wisconsin, we can't do really design build. I think Sean was talking about that with us on our prep call. Maybe we can work some laws where maybe we can start doing some of this, work with our legislators, and help to affect change.
Yeah, thank you for those comments. I think they're really, really on point. Alina, last but not least.
Yeah, well, and I think building on what both Sean and Nancy have said, but I think there's really two huge opportunities we have right now with this infrastructure bill and thinking about maximizing its impact. And one is thinking about how we can help ensure that all these investments also help us meet our climate and energy goals. I mean, water is energy in so many ways, and they're so inextricably linked. And I think it comes back, Dolly, to your point about how we are clear about the benefits of water, infrastructure investments. How can we quantify the impact that that's having on our city's climate mitigation efforts and all of our efforts to sort of help tackle the most massive change in front of us? So I think being more creative about that, getting better data to understand that relationship, that feels to me like priority number one. And priority number two is thinking about how all of these investments can help benefit the people and the places that need them most. And I think it's so interesting, Nancy's the pushback about, oh, we want to do economic development, not, infrastructure. But this is such a huge opportunity for all of those infrastructure replacements to be workforce development, to be economic development. And I think having leadership that understands and we can help frame up the opportunity for all of these funds to really, drive forward economic development. That is so important. And I think some of that is high-level leadership understanding that, and some of it is partnership groups that are rolling up that story and making sure that that's clear, and some of it is creating contracts that build in those kinds of incentives to make sure that those groups are getting contracts and finding career pathways, and finding ways into work. But those are the two opportunities I think that are once in a lifetime with this funding, that I hope many localities will show us the way to get it right.
Yeah, that's really, really well put, Alina. And I have to say that I think it is a golden opportunity, and one that I wouldn't want to see wasted. You've touched on so many interesting aspects to this that make it, again, such a rich time, right, to be engaged in problem solving in this space. Sean mentioned the fragmentation of the water industry. You mentioned partnership and rolling things up. And then you have equity investors who are desperate to put money to work in this space, but who need sizable and well-structured investment opportunities that really follow very utility-like characteristics. This isn't, Wall Street wanting high double-digit real estate type returns. These are pension funds wanting to put money to work. And then you've got all these problems that need capital, and there's a huge amount of money out there looking for a home. One thing that you touched on, I think, is particularly interesting, and in light of Sean's point, is how do you maybe develop more regional systems, right, or regional solutions, aggregating, right, and driving economies of scale in, you know, how solutions are deployed, because it's so fragmented. Everyone is, you know, fairly left to their own devices in a way to find solutions. And you know, I've always thought that there's a huge opportunity to try to find models and templates that then can get rolled out. But even better would be if folks were to join forces. And it sounds like you've accomplished quite a lot of that in your region.
Well, Chicago's really fortunate to have a number of institutions and organizations whose job it is to create and sustain regional collaboration. So, you know, Current is one with a very specific focus on collaborations that power water innovation and solve water challenges and help us frame up this blue economy opportunity and bring, you know, federal money to ground in our region for that. We have, you know, a metropolitan planning council that is thinking on behalf of our region. We have just a long track record, you know, of purpose-built entities. I think that's what it takes, because otherwise it is on a project by project basis. And those kinds of collaborations are very difficult to sustain. Like collaboration, time and effort and resource is always, you know, outside that main lane of what everybody's doing, unless you're purpose built to be a collaboration vehicle. And I think taking a hard look at who does that work in your region, and if you don't have an organization that does, like, is now a good moment to stand one up. I mean, there's certainly wonderful examples all over the country to draw from, and many different ways to structure them.
Yeah, that's great advice. We've got a flow of questions here, so I'm going to go to the audience questions. And you know, we've mentioned innovation, and I think this is an innovation-linked one. So I'll choose this to go with the flow of this discussion, which is, where would you put the digital transformation at, you know, for the industry? And you know, I think maybe linked to that, if you could cover maybe your experience of the digitalization of the water space, but also you know, when you hear about all those hundreds of leaks that Nancy has to, you know, deal with every year, you know, other technological solutions that, you know, could help facilitate identification or, you know, mitigation of some of the system decay issues, or otherwise.
Can I jump in, Dolly? Because I hadn't thought of it before, and you inspired me. We have reached out to a company that does satellite leak detection, and we've flown our city. This is our third year flying, and we do go out then and correlate the leaks, and we have proactively repaired mains, over 60 mains that could have broken in the winter. We've fix them in the summer when we don't have to go into overtime and things, and that's been a really neat technology for us. And we've offered to get our neighboring utilities. We're not huge like Chicago, you know, Green Bay is about 100,000 people, and you know, but we've had other communities go with us, and they, you know, just because we've done the minimum, they can get in pretty cheaply and get their systems also done. And so that's one of the technologies we've been using to identify and proactively repair leaks.
That's music to everyone's ears. That sounds like a win-win. Sean, how about you?
In terms of innovation and technology and digitization, just look at some of the questions. I see the industry slowly getting better. There's a lot of different software out there to digitize and, you know, monitor and create like an asset management system that can ultimately save a lot of money, because you're not waiting till something breaks. Like what Nancy was saying, you're being more proactive in making repairs, and you can better monitor things on when the last time certain projects or assets were maintained or serviced. But I still think there's a long way to go, because, you know, a lot of different municipalities and utilities don't necessarily have the funding for something like that, right? Because they're focused on putting their funding to where you're putting out fires and when fixing things that break. So I think it's coming. I think the technology is there, but it's a matter of actually implementing it across the 50,000 plus utilities.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And to pick up on that point, I think we hear a lot from the technology companies that are building digital solutions about the different challenges of trying to kind of break into all these different small and mid-sized utilities at scale. So I think one of the big opportunities is around, you know, some clearinghouses or guidance, or maybe just like batched technical assistance or something where there's a way to help both the startups and the companies that have these great solutions. Utilis is one we hear about a lot, but there are so many others, and just help, especially some of the, not the gigantic utilities, but some of the ones that are much more numerous, right, around the country, pick up digital solutions a little more quickly.
And if I might add, I don't mean to hog, but I was thinking of other things. We have a couple of years ago, we combined with our neighboring utilities and we did this, what we call the SPLASH program. And it's basically working together as water utilities to identify things that we could do together. And one of the first things we did was meter or cross connection control, and where we're sharing best practices. We're looking at doing hydrant or tank painting and other businesses. The Green Bay Water Utility has now 4 billing customers, and we do water billing for 4 other municipalities in our area. We've also wholesaled to 4 other utilities and things like that. That we're trying to reduce, reduce the redundancy and also increase efficiencies by pooling together things that we can do together.
Those are great examples.
Yeah, fantastic. Music to everyone's ears. Let's see, we've got, Elena, everybody wants to know how Current got set up, so please provide information in the chat. Let's see, interesting questions, so many of them. I'm afraid I'm not going to get to all of them, but I'm going to try and hit a couple more. With respect to let's see here, unions, I think is an interesting one. How are unions in water infrastructure factored into how the funding is utilized and that it's distributed equitably? And certainly from my vantage point in structuring, public-private partnerships, we always embed labor practices into the contracts themselves, whether it's, folks want to utilize a project labor agreement or mandatory requirements when it comes to prevailing wage and things like that, and labor protections. And that's another advantage in a way of, I think, of these structures, because you can contractually provide and require, right, that whoever you want is included in the workforce, including DBE, MBE, and unionized labor. But let me ask Nancy that question. How does that factor in your thinking?
I'm sorry, I was reading some of the questions. What did you wanted me to address?
I was just picking the one about unions and,
Oh, the unions. Yeah. Sorry. It was Act 10, so 2010 in Wisconsin, the governor basically took unions kind of out of the municipal environment and state environment. So we have union workers as contractors, and we use, we bid work out. We have to bid out contracts for water main replacements and things like that, and that factors into that. So I guess as far as the unions go, we know that we have to treat our employees right, or they will go someplace else. So we need to make sure that, without the union environment, that we have to adjust how we're managing and making sure that we're following through on things like that. So.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. Well, look, as I predicted, we didn't get through everything. We're going to have to do a part 2, Naomi, because there's too much to talk about here. But I know that the remainder of the panelists and the speakers who are coming will have a phenomenal range of super interesting vantage points to offer as well. But thank you to my panelists for what has been a really rich discussion, and I hope it's been thought-provoking for participants at the conference.
Thanks, Dolly.
Thank you all so much. I know, Dolly, you could have gone on for hours there. So many questions, such an interesting discussion. So I'm sure this will continue in another session later on. But again, thank you to everyone who was in that panel. I want to get to the results from the last poll before we move on to our really interesting fireside chat. So, okay, interesting there. 67% all agree. Attack on or collapse of infrastructure is the greatest cybersecurity risk. I want to move on to question number 4 so that we can get to that, and we'll get to the answers after. What do you think will be the biggest challenge in rebuilding our water system in the next 10 years? Getting enough funding, political partisanship, developing enough sustainable tech, or water shortages? So make sure you take part in that poll. And now let's move on to a fireside chat on how to put stimulus funds to work with a cross-border mayoral duo. First, we have Walter Sendzik, the mayor of the city of St. Catharines. As mayor, Walter brings a strategic focus and business-like approach to City Hall, where he has approved a new strategic plan, an economic development strategy, stabilized tax rate increases, and implemented long-term budgeting. Speaking with him will be Billy McKinney, mayor of the city of Zion in Illinois. Before becoming mayor, he served as the commissioner of building, zoning, and public property for the city, was instrumental in implementing the rental house certification program, revived the City of Zion community cleanup days, and spent 4 decades in the NBA as a player, coach, talent scout, and executive. Very interesting. I'm going to welcome in both of you, and you guys can take it away for a fireside chat.
Thank you very much, Naomi. Mayor McKinney, good to see you again.
Great to see you too, and great to listen to all of the panelists today talking about a very interesting subject when you start talking about water and infrastructure.
It is, and I just want to begin before we get into the fireside chat. And I just want to acknowledge that the land in which I'm here, located in St. Catharines, Niagara, is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. And I share that as a land acknowledgement. And these territories where I live and work, and they're covered by something called the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. And this was a treaty originally agreed to by the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and the Mississauga peoples. And the European settlers were brought into the agreement through the Treaty of Niagara. The purpose of this Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement is to ensure we all recognize the fact that we all have a responsibility to ensure the dish, which is the territories on which we live and work, is never emptied, and that we take care of the land and its inhabitants in a way that ensures its future sustainability. And I share that as part of Canada's move through truth and reconciliation. And I share it with all the panelists and the attendees today, because we're talking about water, and water is so important to us as communities, but it was also very important to Indigenous culture. And Mayor McKinney has taken a leadership role through the Water Equity Commission, the Mayor's Water Equity Commission, that's part of the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Cities Initiative. And he's the chair of that commission. So I want to start, Mayor, with you. Just briefly touch on what is the commission? What's your objectives? Because it's made up of a number of mayors on both the American and Canadian side. What is the objective, and where are some of the outcomes that you're moving towards?
Yeah, right now we have about 137 cities that are involved in this on a binational platform. And we are trying to, number one, there are 4 initiatives that we're looking at, is to eliminate lead from water, which is crucial on all public and private properties. And this is required by the federal lead and copper rule. As everyone knows, what happened in Flint, Michigan was an absolute tragedy. So that's one of the platforms we're looking at, removing lead in the water. 2 is water service affordability. And I've heard that talked about this afternoon, this morning, or this afternoon, wherever you are. And being able to have residents to be able to the most basic personal protection equipment, and that's water, to be able to wash your hands, to be able to stay hydrated, and to be able to flush your toilets. The other area is urban flooding, in which we're working at. As you can see, what's happened in throughout the world and in the United States with New Orleans, New York, New Jersey, urban flooding. Detroit has become a really big issue, and it really impacts a lot of people that are in flood zones or in high-risk areas because of economic disparities, historic redlining, zoning practices, and infrastructure investment, lack of infrastructure investment. And the last area is creating job opportunities in the water workforce. So those are the 4 major initiatives that we are working on at this point. And we've been working closely with President Biden's infrastructure team to address a lot of the questions that have been asked in the chat rooms.
And it's interesting, because I'm glad you brought that up, the American Rescue Plan Act. And in terms of because these aren't insignificant funds. So when you talk about the lead line service, so we're talking about water infrastructure. So one of the most important pieces of the infrastructure is getting the water from the treatment center to the households, to the apartments. And that's $1 billion. So when you look at this American Rescue Plan Act, Mayor, how quickly and how do you see the local lower tier municipalities accessing these dollars?
Well, there was $48 billion in funding from the water infrastructure bill. 23.5 of that billion of that goes to normal water infrastructure. As we talk about infrastructure, one thing is really obvious with all of our communities that, and I saw this on one of the graphics earlier, the aging of the infrastructure within our cities. For example, Zion, Illinois, we in 4 years, we've had 182 water main breaks. And I want to say 76 of those water main breaks, 79 of those were in our water mains that were developed from 1920 to 1939. And the rest was, those breaks came in a period of lines that were put in from 1960 to 1969. So that's crucial that communities get this money and be able to repair water lines, because it does impact water rates. You start talking about leaking, leak detection, how important that is, because the more leaks you have, the more water you use, the higher rates are as a result.
So it's interesting because you talk about water main breaks, and we just had an individual from Green Bay talking about that as well. And when you tie it into climate change, what we experienced here in St. Catharines, I'm going to say, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, we had a significant freeze. So all of February was about -20. So for those who aren't from the Great Lakes area, it was really cold in St. Catharines, Niagara. And we had a dramatic increase in the water main breaks because our frost level, so let's get to detail, our frost level is normally just under 4 feet. So if we're anything at the 4 feet level, you're not really going to be affected by frost. We had 6 feet of frost in that wintertime. So we had a huge increase in the amount of water main bursts. So when we talk about climate change, we talk about water infrastructure. The importance of looking at where climate is going and the impact of extreme weather, that's one example from the Great Lakes perspective, that we may have to look at our infrastructure depth of water lines, and also how do we build more resilience into this, all of which cost money through research. We had some private sector individuals talking here today. These are all the complicated pieces, if you will, that add up to it. And Mayor, in your experience, when we talk about, again, accessing federal dollars, the speed at which you've been discussing with the federal government, how quickly will you see, or do you foresee these dollars getting into the lower tiers?
Well, we're hoping quickly. It's always a process when you're dealing with government, and I could go into that. As everyone knows, government moves slowly, but it's so crucial right now as the winter months are rapidly approaching in the Great Lakes. We're right on Lake Michigan, halfway between Chicago and Milwaukee. And that's when your public works department, I was just talking with our public works director today and talking about, as winter approaches, what are the condition of our mains? Are we going to have those issues? So getting those dollars to be able to start to deal with these flaws in our infrastructure for all of our cities is crucial to be able to have that money receive it as quickly as possible. The other part of it is just the funding. It's not sufficient enough, even though there was $48 billion of funding in this new infrastructure bill. We have to continue to look at ways to be able to kind of collaboratively go about when there's time for appropriations, put more money into these items, into these issues. For example, there was a gentleman on there on the chat that was asking about the homeless and water bill payments. And so there's a low-income household drinking water and waste management emergency assistance program. $8 billion were put into that. And we're asking, the Mayor's Commission on Water Equity is asking for $100 million in technical assistance. We need more of that, and right away, because now with the pandemic upon us for the last 18 months, it has impacted so many people in terms of being the threat of turning off their water. And that is, as you say, it's our lifeblood. Water, having water, clean water and affordable water, that's our lifeblood.
It's a right. It shouldn't be a privilege. It should be a right. And
absolutely.
That's where a lot of this infrastructure. I just want to turn it a bit now, just to briefly talk about some of the other infrastructure pieces. In terms of what we're seeing, so I'll give those in attendance a perspective from St. Catharines. About 2 weeks ago, we've gone through about 3 weeks of 41 degrees, very hot here in the Niagara region. I'm sure across the Great Lakes Basin, we were stuck in that high heat bubble. We, for the first time, had detected blue-green algae coming into the water system. So we pull our water in through a canal that comes down from Lake Erie into our system. And that was one of those moments where, as a mayor, considering what happened in Toledo, Ohio, you really get concerned about the appearance of blue-green algae. And for those who may not know, it's created by fertilizer, high heat within the water. It creates this very toxic algae, dangerous to dogs and animals, and very dangerous to human beings. And when it gets into the system, and then you look at it and go, this is why infrastructure is so important. So it's not just the infrastructure of where you clean the water; it's also what's going into the Great Lakes. And this is where being able to ensure that the nutrients that are coming in through the farmlands are being controlled. It's making sure that all the different river and tributaries, as we heard from Chicago, that are coming into the system are being monitored and controlled. All of this has a cost to it. And so when we look at the infrastructure of water, it also includes our shorelines. Here in St. Catharines, we have about a $13 to $14 million deficit in terms of shoreline erosion. Mayor McKinney, I don't know what it is in your community in terms of shoreline erosion.
Oh, we have a significant issue here, and one of our challenges with shoreline erosion is we have a spent fuel rods from a decommissioned nuclear plant that are sitting 200 yards from Lake Michigan. So we're working on several initiatives to get those removed, number one. But the other issue you're talking about, the blue algae, is the Mayor's Commission on Water Equity has been looking to create a cross-agency lead safe communities fund. And there was $46 billion that was being put into that fund to replace lead pipes, but another $12 billion to deal with other contaminants that go in water. And of course, with the issues in Toledo, and you're talking about St. Catharines, we definitely need to have more money for those resources.
And when people think about infrastructure and, well, why would shoreline be such an important part? Both of our wastewater treatment facilities are located on the shores of Lake Ontario. And I'm sure it's probably the same with a lot of shoreline communities across the Great Lakes, that their downstream for the wastewater is very close to the shoreline. So these are all pieces of the infrastructure that, if the federal and state and provincial governments don't see as necessities, what happens is the burden is carried more by the municipalities. And Mayor McKinney, I think you've touched on the equity part. The affordability of water is becoming such a challenge for municipalities, but also for individuals who are struggling to pay the rates, and it shouldn't be that way.
Oh, absolutely. And speaking of that, when you're talking about municipalities, they're in the shorelines and the erosion, those are the economic engines for so many cities like Chicago, for example, 45 minutes to my south, Milwaukee, 45 minutes to the north. There's so much that goes on the lakefront, as in other communities throughout our countries, where they derive revenue streams from that. So if those are limited, it certainly impacts what you're trying to do to protect the infrastructure there. And there's been a lot of discussion about what it requires to protect from the urban flooding. It's a tremendous amount of money, and more money has to be devoted to that as the lake lines or the shorelines continue to rise.
So we only got a few minutes left, and a lot of great information, because as mayors, we're often on the front lines of when a crisis occurs. We're on the front lines of the downward pressures that are created because of climate change and extreme weather events. And so, Mayor, just wrapping it up, from as chair of the Water Equity Commission, a year from now, what do you hope to be able to look back at and say, this is what we've achieved over the last year?
I'd say first and foremost that we have addressed the lead pipe issue all across the United States. And I think Elena Hartman was talking about a collaboration engine, which is what I feel like the Mayor's Commission on Water Equity is, involving so many different entities that it impacts so many different people. For example, I want to talk about the state water revolving fund, which with smaller communities and mid-sized communities, they can't match the grants. Usually the grants are given, but they don't have the ability to match the grant. So one of the things the Mayor's Commission on Water Equity is asking is to remove that for cities that are struggling. I think that's crucial.
And that's going to be a key that we're going to be following as part of the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Cities Initiative. Mayor McKinney's on the board. He's on the executive with me, and it is an honor to be joining everybody here at CityAge. This is a very important topic. It is one of the fundamental parts of life, which is water. And if we don't get this right, we're just letting down future generations who will be depending on this more and more as we go through some of the extremities that we're seeing. So Mayor McKinney, I just want to say thank you for your leadership. You've done an outstanding job. I love the Jordan. I love the Bulls logo behind you, the Bulls jersey behind you. You're an outstanding NBA player. You were an outstanding executive in the NBA. And now you're here as mayor of your hometown, and it's an honor to be able to work beside you on so many of these initiatives. So I'm going to turn it back over to Naomi. You're doing a great job, and look forward to hearing from the rest of the speakers today.
Thank you both so much. What an incredible discussion. Really, I know we had a lot of comments there, but really, as you said, Walter, just an incredibly important topic that we need to be talking about. So let's take a very quick look at our poll results from before. You can see all of the answers there. We're going to actually bring Cindy back. I just want to mention to all of you that she's going to be coming back around 1. So I just want to try and get through this next panel here so we can bring her back at the end, because I know we had some technical difficulties. So we're going to get to our final panel discussion, water challenges amid a changing climate. We're looking at climate impacts on our water systems. We're going to discuss how to build infrastructure that can withstand extreme weather events, ways to reduce use, and strategies to improve water quality. Let me introduce you to our panelists. First, we have Deborah Shore. Deborah is a commissioner on the board of the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago. She has been a strong advocate for cleaning up the Chicago waterways and for resource recovery, including the reuse of treated water and the generation of biogas. Naveed Maram is the Chief Operating Officer for the Great Lakes Water Authority's wastewater operating services, providing services for treatment facilities, pump stations, community wells, and retention basins. Robert Michael McKay serves as the Executive Director of the Great Lakes Institute for Environmental Research and professor in the Department of Earth and Environmental Sciences at the University of Windsor, where he researches the environment in large lakes. Bree Pleer is the Manager of Sustainability at Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District, MMSD. Pleer helps to provide water reclamation and flood management services for about 1.1 million people in 28 communities in the greater Milwaukee area. Our panel chair is David Cook. David has spent over 30 years with Black & Veatch, providing engineering services to meet the needs of water and wastewater utilities throughout the Great Lakes. David, you can take it from here.
Thank you, Naomi. I'm happy to be here from Chicago. We've heard a lot about Chicago today and really excited to talk about these panelists. So I'm going to jump right into this and just with a quick hit question to each of the 4 panelists here. And I want to hear your big picture thought on what do you see as our water utilities' biggest challenge in addressing resiliency in the face of climate change impacts? I'll start with Deborah.
Thank you, Dave, and it's great to be here. I think it's really coordination. None of these issues or problems are restricted to one agency or one utility alone. The Biden administration has talked about a whole of government approach. I'd like to see us trying some demonstration projects in each region that looks at a whole of neighborhood or even a whole of house approach, so that you're not only doing energy efficiency, but you're looking at stormwater management and lead and water quality, but also lead paint and planting trees for urban heat island effect. And in other words, really looking at how to help our communities be more resilient in a comprehensive way.
Yeah, good point. Naveed, why don't you go next?
Thank you. Thank you for having me today. Yeah, I think one of the big things that we look into is that level of collaboration. One of the high level goals and principles that we function under, one is pipes have no boundaries. So we want to make sure that we look at the region as a whole, look at all of our infrastructures and take out the municipal boundaries and just say, we got water, let's figure out a place to put it and make sure we treat it at the maximum amount of water. And so how do we do that is by maximizing all of the infrastructure that's in the ground to be able to do that. The second part I think it's that we try to drive for is, people own what they create. And that comes through that collaboration and partnership. We created a master plan that built a 40-year roadmap that we brought all of our partners, and we call our customers, our regulators, as partners in this journey that we're going to be on, because it is a complicated solution. It's not going to be easy, and we need to make sure that everybody at the table has a voice, so that we're not backtracking. We don't make a significant amount of progress on the decision and then have to backtrack when we meet with our regulators and determine that there's issues. So I think that collaboration and working together to build the idea and drive it forward for success is going to be one of the key things that the water sector needs to be successful.
Bree, any additional comments?
Well, I love Deborah's point on the collaboration. I think that is really important. For me, the thing that worries me, or I see as our biggest challenge moving forward, is getting things done fast enough to actually do something in time. There's so much work to be done. So the collaboration is so important, but also just making sure that we can actually get it done.
Good point. And last but not least, Dr. McKay.
Thanks, Dave, and it's a pleasure joining the panel this afternoon. So scientists at the Great Lakes Institute for Environmental Research at the University of Windsor, we address complex environmental problems that cross conventional disciplinary boundaries, such as the effects of multiple environmental stressors on large lakes and their watersheds. A lot of what we do at GLEAR addresses the resiliency of our Great Lakes in the face of multiple threats. The Great Lakes and their watersheds are resilient. Time and again, the Great Lakes are written off as dying. Yet, as we've seen, recovery in the face of threats in the past, ranging from the legacy of industrialization to invasive species to eutrophication such as algal blooms. However, the resiliency we've seen has often been tied to actions aligned with provisions in the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, whereby so-called areas of concern are targeted for cleanup through remedial action plans. In the past, remediation efforts have been mainly targeted discrete threats, contaminants, pollutants having known sources. Climate change is a different beast, as it's mainly an indirect threat, which in turn triggers more direct concerns such as warming and extreme storm events. So unlike the legacy problems the Great Lakes have dealt with in the past, the source is more difficult to target and it's more unpredictable.
Good points. Let me delve a little bit deeper into this. And I was going to make a comment at the beginning, so I'll make it now. It was interesting from one of the poll questions that climate change, extreme weather was identified as a major concern, and ties right to what this panel is going to talk about. So I'm excited to hear about what our panelists have to say. So back to Bree, up in Milwaukee, we heard a little bit about the Green Infrastructure Program from the Corvius panelists earlier. So I'd be interested to hear your perspective on how does MMSD see that program enhancing resilience to increased frequency and duration rainfall, and how it works in concert with your other gray infrastructure.
Yeah, so we've had green infrastructure programs for about the last 15 to 20 years. One of the things that we see, green infrastructure is really one of those types of solutions that can sort of layer on and help our system function better. So our gray infrastructure system is extremely vulnerable with the changing climate. We are seeing warmer and much wetter weather here in Milwaukee. And so if we're going to continue to make investments into our gray infrastructure system, we have to make sure that we are also layering green infrastructure on to help protect those investments. And then as we look at green infrastructure, there's just a host of so many other things that green infrastructure can do and provide to a community that really go to the heart of resiliency. You know, you've got carbon sequestration. It can help reduce the urban heat island effect, which we see as a major issue, particularly within the city of Milwaukee. You know, we've got some research studies going on with UW-Madison that are super, super exciting, looking at how the urban heat island is creating some microclimates, and it's causing some of our more disadvantaged neighborhoods to have a greater risk during this, you know, storms that we're seeing, and how we can use green infrastructure to potentially improve that heat island effect and improve quality of life and things like that in the area. But really, green infrastructure, the green infrastructure programs are one of the ways that we're looking at integrated watershed management, so that by the year 2035, we can reach our 2035 vision of getting to zero overflows, which means that our system is functioning really well. But again, this is really something that needs to move quickly. We have to do this now, because we are seeing this definitely wetter, warmer climate cause us some issues in how we're operating.
I think that's a good segue to a question I have for Naveed. We've seen some really extreme bouts of weather over there in the Detroit area. I think it's really interesting that most of it has missed us here in Chicago and aimed right for Detroit. You know, leading to a lot of flooding and basin backup issues. And how is this informing the planning that the authority is then doing to contribute to the solutions, including that collaboration that you talked about with your regional partners?
Yeah. So yeah, it definitely it's been an interesting wave of rain that we have been experiencing over the last 2 months, and just we look forward to winter for the first time here in Michigan. So, you know, I think it really opened our eyes on the master planning effort. So I talked a little bit about us building a roadmap, that 40-year roadmap. And part of that was, you know, focusing on water quality, focusing on capacity. But now, like, we have this new requirement, which we're kind of starting to create it. And now I think we need to talk to our member partners to understand what service level is expected of the regional system, right? And I think that level of collaboration is necessary. What we experienced here in Detroit was a 1,000-year storm, nearly 6 to 8 inches of rain that we received in less than 24 hours, where we have designed our infrastructure for a 10-year 1-hour event. So 1.7 inches of rain, or so that level of service needs to be reassessed with all of our partners to make sure that we're not investing just in purely water quality, because we have to also understand public health. And where do we draw that line? Because there's always going to be a bigger storm. So where do we make that investment? Over the next 10 years, we have budgeted $3.4 billion of investment to be able to incorporate into our infrastructure. But now we have to look at it with a lens of, is the infrastructure investment that we're making going to relieve, what kind of relief is going to provide, and what kind of level of service is going to provide for our residents? We want to make sure we have a resilient infrastructure, but does that mean building more gray infrastructure that only escalates the problem in the future? Because now who comes after us will have to maintain a larger pool of infrastructure, and affordability is an issue today, and that is going to be even more of an issue in the coming years to have. And truly, as part of that collaborative effort, when I talked about it, it allowed us to prioritize as a team. So our member partners, our 19 member partners, over 79 communities that we serve, all had a voice in what decisions we're going to make. So 700 million of that investment is going to be in sewer separations. That's going to provide real improvements not only on water quality, but also improvements on potential flood control, because we're going to separate the stormwater out of the system. And I think the biggest benefit that we gained as part of this collaboration was we were able to build a regional watershed hub. And GLWA as that hub allows for inputs from all sectors into our space so that we can all come together and have that relationship, because this is not going to be easy conversations, right? Our regulators are not going to be happy with some of the decisions that we want to make to be able to provide flood control and not necessarily look at a water quality lens at a given storm. So that watershed hub allows us to have a good relationship among all the partners that are involved. And through that conduit, we can have these difficult conversations and develop a plan for Southeast Michigan to provide the best service, and make sure that our residents and our customers and our member partners all have a clear understanding of what that level of service is. So we're not, after a large storm, all pointing fingers and trying to and standing together to find the next best solution, really. So that's some of the collaboration that we have seen great improvement on.
Very, very interesting in that large metro area with that collaboration. It's great to see. And I'm going to turn to Commissioner Shore now. Similar collaboration, I think, in with the agencies they deal with. But I'm going to take a slightly different tack. And it's not that the district here is not focused on flooding and basement backup protection, but what's been interesting here is we talk a lot about adaptation when we're dealing with how we're going to adapt to deal with these climate change. But the district's taking a tack on contributing to mitigation. So looking at energy minimization, carbon minimization to do your part to help the climate change fight. Can you talk a little about that?
Sure, Dave. And just so folks know, the Water Reclamation District has a $1 billion annual budget, spends more than 40 million a year on electricity, treats on average 1.5 billion gallons a day of wastewater. That's in dry weather conditions. So it's big. So we're looking at how do we reduce our energy usage and be more efficient, as well as how can we generate more of our own renewable energy. It's a multifaceted approach. We are looking at recovery and utilization of biogas. Currently, we use between 80 and 90% of what we generate, but not 100%. And so that's a resource and an asset that we need to take advantage of. And we could generate even more if we sought to do so. We're deploying a whole range of energy efficiency projects, including installing, say, new turbo blowers at our small plant that can save up to 400,000 kilowatt hours a year and nearly $30,000 a year. It's just more efficient. We're transitioning our fleet to electric vehicles. We're using heat pumps to capture heat from sewers for heating and cooling. Our board just authorized $500,000 a year in the next 2 years for purchasing renewable energy credits, which, depending on the price, will offset between 13 and 20% of our use. We're trying to be conscious about where our pension funds are invested so they don't contribute to climate change. We're identifying opportunities in our supply chain to reduce scope 3 emissions, largely from chemicals that we use. We're working with partners who produce low carbon cement, a company called Ozinga, based in the Chicago region. We're exploring digital and artificial intelligence solutions to better use the equipment we already have and reduce our electricity consumption. So we're trying to optimize our existing resources and processes. And finally, we are working on our own climate action plan and a sustainability and resiliency plan that I hope we will trot out by the end of this year. But we know we want to be a leader in this region, and the way that climate change is expressing itself through these more intense rain events plant us firmly on the edge of trying to address it.
Yeah, I really like the idea of, not only, obviously adaptation is something we all need to think about and do our best, but contributing to that mitigation is really important too. So applaud your work there. I'll switch over to Dr. McKagan. You talked a little bit about this in your opening comments there, but a little bit, we talked a lot about wastewater and stormwater here, and I know you deal a lot with drinking water and looking at the impact that climate change has to the quality and quantity of our potential sources. I know we have some questions from some folks out west that really have true, a lot more quantity issues than we might have here in the Great Lakes, but the quality issues I think are a real concern. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Right, and maybe I've given a little preview to my comments with the poster hanging behind me. I think most on this call today might be familiar with the algal bloom problems we have in the Great Lakes, particularly in the lower lakes, and some of the embayments in our upper Great Lakes. So as I mentioned in my introductory statements, climate change is contributing to more frequent intense storms, and also that was commented on by Naveed from the Great Lakes Water Authority, and these intense storm events are exacerbating, probably the extreme highs and lows we're seeing in water levels throughout the Great Lakes. But they're also bringing large amounts of rainfall that are essentially leaching nutrients from the landscape surrounding the lakes, which are really fueling the blooms that we see in the Great Lakes right now. Obviously, a warmer atmosphere holds more moisture, increasing the frequency and intensity of heavy rain and snow events. And overall, the US has seen an increase of about 4% in precipitation from over the last 50 years or so. But the Great Lakes region has seen an even higher percent in increase in precipitation, about 10% over the same time interval, usually coming as large events. In the future, we expect to see precipitation redistribute across seasons. What that means is we'll likely have wetter winters and springs and probably warmer and drier summers. This will likely exacerbate things like harmful algal blooms. The correlation between these wetter springs and winters and the algal blooms is quite robust, and actually presently informs modeling done by NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the predictive models for algal bloom expanse in Western Lake Erie. The data that inputs informs those models is essentially the spring nutrient pulse that comes into Western Lake Erie, mainly from the Maumee River that flows through Toledo. These blooms are not just unsightly, they also produce toxins, and hence the concern over our water intakes. They can produce neurotoxins, they produce hepatotoxins or toxins that will target the liver. And I believe the mayors that joined us, Mayor Senzik and McKinney, both spoke a little bit about the algal blooms and specifically mentioned Toledo, Ohio. I was working in Northwest Ohio at that time, August 2014, when the water crisis occurred. And you could see how an event like that essentially immobilized the city. Over 400,000 residents of Toledo without access to a safe, secure water supply for over 48 hours, really paralyzed that entire area. And I think increased awareness throughout the basin regarding the potential threat of algal blooms to come. So we think of these blooms as mainly being associated with places like Western Lake Erie or some of our embayments, Green Bay, Saginaw Bay, Lake St. Clair, et cetera. But I'm sure that many of you on the webinar today have also heard some of the stories coming out of places like Lake Superior recently about blooms. Pristine bodies of water. Lake Superior is one of the last places on Earth I would ever expect to see an algal bloom. Not just the fact that it's generally cold, but that it is essentially a desert in terms of nutrients. There's almost no measurable phosphorus in Lake Superior. It goes back to climate change and these intense storm events. Naveed talked about the 1,000-year storm events that Detroit's been seeing. Same things happened in the Western Lake Superior watershed over the past decade. There have been, I think, 3 of these, 500-year storm events that caused plumes of sediment to form in the western basin of Lake Superior. That's a translocation of nutrients from the landscape into the coastal waters. And those coastal waters will warm up enough that actually support blooms of algae. And so we're starting to see blooms occurring in places where I would never expect to see these happen. And again, this has got to be of concern for municipalities, for their water intakes. We've seen, since the Toledo water crisis in 2014, we've seen much more vigilance in the communities that surround Lake Erie. We've seen a move to increase monitoring and surveillance of the water. And this all increases the costs incurred by our municipal partners. And so I think, as the Laurentian Great Lakes are shared waters between the US and Canada, successful mitigation of these events is going to require increased binational cooperation, and it's going to cost some money. And we've been proactive, or we've been reactive mainly to the problem, and we need to be being more proactive, both in terms of climate action plans, but also in land use decisions, because that's really where the root of the problems are occurring, at least in the lower lakes.
Thank you. I could continue this conversation for a long time. Just like Dolly had said on the first panel, I think there's a lot of things that we could continue to explore. I'm just really interested in the aspects of how we effectively, adapt and mitigate, as we talked about Commissioner Shore, and also thinking about kind of the social equity part about it. Those that are most vulnerable to these impacts, and that need the most help, and how do we make sure it's financially equitable and affordable to ourselves while we're essentially saving the world in this climate change crisis. And I thank you, all of our panelists, for their very insightful comments. I'll turn it back over to Nate.
This wraps up this edition of Future of the Great Lakes. A big thank you again to our sponsors, Black & Veatch and White & Case. And thanks to you, the network of more than 10,000 leaders in the business of building our cities for the future. We've been bringing CityAge to you virtually from the start of the pandemic. I've been there for it all. We will be continuing to do that, and we will be getting to live events too soon. And if you would like to have a CityAge session around an idea or topic, please get in touch with us. Our mission is to bring leaders together who are building the future. Until next time, stay well, stay healthy. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone.